Take your seat, settle in, and listen up. Gophers 101 is underway and in session. It's time to go to class and talk all things Gophers.
I am essentially coming to you via witness protection this morning in Iowa City, Manny Hill, and Gopher Nation. Thank you for joining Gophers 101. I am at an Airbnb in Iowa City, and the lighting very poetic in this room for how the football game went at Kinnick Stadium on Saturday afternoon. This
Here,
is
Ross,
the best.
let me. Wow, that didn't change much.
You're going to try and dim yours so you can match where I'm at. I would say it is very poetic for the lighting to be poor in the Airbnb. Also, just to add a cherry on top of what was a rough Saturday for the Golden Gopher football program, our coffee pot at the Airbnb is out. So I am, it's a struggle bus this morning, as it was for the Gopher football team on Saturday afternoon. Obviously, I was in attendance. I've seen a lot of bad football games before. I know I've seen worse. I watched Iowa beat the Gophers 55-0. I was at the Big House a handful of years ago when I think the Michigan won like 55-3 or something over the Gophers. I do not remember. Maybe that was 55-0. So
55-10 or something.
Okay. So I'm not convinced it's the worst Gopher football game that I've ever seen. I wouldn't even call it much of a football game because it was over before you could really settle into your seat if you were a Gopher football fan. And by the way, plenty of Gopher football fans in attendance. That is a sad subplot to what happened yesterday. And before I get Manny's thoughts, just want to let people know my voice is awful. It's because I'm either dealing with allergies or a cold. I had very little to drink this weekend, which is also disappointing when it comes to watching the football game yesterday. I probably should have had a bit more alcohol to make it through that football game. Manny, your thoughts on a very disappointing, to say the least, Saturday at Kinnick Stadium for the Golden Gopher football program, who falls to 5-3 on the season?
You know, as I talked to you about before we started, you know, obviously, as a Gopher fan and, you know, somebody who wants to see this program do well, I hate Iowa. I think if you're a Gopher fan, you hate Iowa, you hate Wisconsin. Those are the rivals that you're, you know, normally supposed to, you know, cheer against and hate to see do well. But losing to Iowa, I mean, losing to Wisconsin is never fun at all under any circumstance. Losing to Iowa, I've grown to kind of be okay with, as long as you're very competitive in the game. Because I guess this in a weird way, I don't hate Iowa as much as I hate Wisconsin, which I'm kind of enjoying. The Badgers being in kind of some misery right now and not being a very good team. I'm really enjoying that. But you know, I've grown to be more okay with losing to Iowa than Wisconsin. The problem is the way you lost yesterday is not acceptable and should never be acceptable. Iowa's a really good team. I think they've shown, you know, that their offense has improved. You know, they were kind of the butt of everybody's joke in terms of, you know, they play ugly, low-scoring games because they can't really score. I mean, it's been like that for years. Now it looks like they at least have kind of a functioning offense, and they made some coaching changes, and they've gotten some more talented players. So they're a good team, but you cannot, if you are going to be serious as a program and trying to progress as a program, games like yesterday can't happen. And I know there's going to be some people that are going to say, well, they lost, look how they lost to Ohio State. That's Ohio State. Ohio State's in a class above a lot of people in college football, not just teams in the Big Ten. All right, that's different. I think if you're trying to get yourself on Iowa's level and compete and be a program that wins regularly 9 games pretty almost every year and is at least competitive in every game that you play in, you can't have performances like that. So going into the game, I kind of figured they would lose the game because I think Iowa's a better football team. Clearly, they're a better football team. But to see the Gophers perform like that, I think you called it perfectly. It's disappointing. I would label it as unacceptable, and it makes you kind of wonder where this program is at in terms of, is there light at the end of the tunnel in terms of like taking a next step and going up another level? And I'm not sure that we're looking at a program and a head coach that is going to be anything more than like a 7 or 8 win coach regularly. And that's a little bit disappointing because I'm kind of wanting to see a little bit more. I'm not in a feeling of, well, they should win 11 or 12 games and be in the college football playoff every year. That's completely unrealistic, I think, for a lot of programs in college football. But I think just to see them perform the way they did yesterday is just, I think it's just kind of a reminder that they still have a ways to go. And it's especially disappointing considering how they played against Nebraska. You know, that's really what the letdown about it is they just look like, over the span of a week, they look like 2 completely different football teams. And it's really, really, really disappointing.
Well, and Manny, I would say for as much credit and praise as I give the head football coach, and people do know if you've watched this podcast long enough or listened and you've seen other podcasts I've been a part of, I will definitely poke fun at him and rip him where it's warranted. I would say this is a stain on overall what's been a pretty good resume at the University of Minnesota. Now 1-8 against Iowa. And Manny, if you go back and look at the beginning of those, which I did this morning, most of them are 1-score losses until recently. It's been worse since the invalid fair catch signal. The last 2 games have largely been non-competitive. Now, I will say this. I told people around me, I think I even told you, I'm not joking when I say I thought Iowa would probably win 38-10 yesterday. I just thought the Gophers were really up against it. I talked about it with Thor. You still have a young, inexperienced quarterback. Until the team plays well on the road this year, I'm not going to believe that they're going to play well on the road. I don't think it'll be any different against Oregon until they prove me wrong. It might not even be any different when they go play at, I think we're technically calling it a neutral site at Wrigley. Maybe we're not. Maybe it's technically a home game for Northwestern.
But that's not a bad team. Northwestern is not a bad team.
Correct. You're looking at a team that may just only win home games this year. And to do so, if they want to go to any form of bowl game like we've talked about, well, you're going to have to beat Michigan State. You get them at home next week. Feels like a grinded out 16-13 type of game. Then you get Wisconsin at the end of the year. Who knows what that will look like? Who knows who the head coach will be? Give the head coach a tiny bit of credit. He called it unacceptable at half, which is not typically a word that he uses. And I think that says 2 things. I think he was surprised by the performance in the first half. I also think it speaks to the level of the Iowa football program and Kirk Ferentz being in his head that he would be that upset at halftime to even use a word like unacceptable. And I don't think credit's the right word. In fairness, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. You lost Darius Taylor basically immediately. You throw a pick 6. You give up a punt return for a touchdown. The redshirt freshman quarterback looked every bit like a redshirt freshman quarterback. He was brutal yesterday. That's easily his worst game as a college football quarterback. And you've mentioned it numerous times. I've talked about it. There will be ups and downs with him. Next week, maybe he throws for 250 yards, 3 touchdowns, and the Gophers win by 10, 14 points. But overall, I think the point for both of us is just you can't be in, again, for as much praise as I give the head football coach, you can't be in year 9 and lose by 38 to probably, I'd say it's your second rival. I still think Wisconsin's number 1. I will say this, people will get upset, but that's okay. Stop with the who hates Iowa chant. You only hate them because you can't beat them. You're 1-9 in the last 10. You've largely been non-competitive. And oh, by the way, every time I come to Kinnick, they're the world's nicest people. Maybe other people have had bad experiences. I've never had a bad experience. They've all been fine. So I can officially tell you today, I don't hate Iowa, and this is not a rivalry because it takes an invalid fair catch signal for the Gophers to get one of these games in the last decade. So I'm I'm also not going to be that worked up about this because, again, I'm very disappointed. It probably is disappointing and a little bit apathy that we are almost a decade into this thing, and I'm going into games thinking the team is going to lose 38-10. I still think there could be upside here, but what you talked about, Manny, upside in the long run, I'll backtrack there. I don't think the upside's coming this year. I don't think they're winning out to go 9-3. I still think 7 wins is entirely obtainable. Maybe 8 if you can beat Northwestern, Wisconsin, and Michigan State. But that feels like a big if after yesterday. One thing that stood out to me, Manny, and we have to go back and talk about it, is the defensive performance you got against Nebraska. Clearly, that had a lot more to do with Nebraska than the University of Minnesota, because you can look at the numbers and say, well, Iowa only had less than 300 yards of total offense. Yeah, but when they wanted offense in the first half, they got it, and then they just quit playing. So there's still a lot of work to do on the defense. I haven't looked this morning, Manny. Maybe you have. I don't know how long Darius Taylor will be out. Nestor's leg looked like it fell off. What a great return back to Iowa City for him. Got burnt a few times in coverage, and I'm 99% positive that was him limping off the field late in the game. I'll be honest. It could have been a different number, which is a horrible thing to admit out loud, but it was a really, really rough day all across the board.
Yeah, I just again, I think you bring up a great point in year to be this far into PJ Fleck's tenure. This is the 9th season under PJ Fleck, and again, to see this kind of performance against a rival. I mean, look, like I said, you're going to lose games to Iowa. You're going to lose games to Wisconsin. Hopefully not this season. But I think to me, it's just the way the performance looks. It's the way your team looks. You've got to, at some point, you've got to find a way to close the gap between you and Iowa. It's not, and Ross, and again, I'm speaking, big picture things here. And I'm kind of talking out of two sides of my neck here. Kirk Cignetti and Clark Lee right now are showing that if you have been largely an insignificant, dormant program in college football for even going back decades, it is possible to turn things around pretty quickly and get yourself into a point of get yourself to a point of relevancy. And in the case of Cignetti, get to the college football playoff, possibly, what's looking like going to be 2 years in a row now for Indiana. And even what Clark Lee is doing in Vanderbilt right now is nothing short of amazing, considering the history of that program. So it's possible. And I think that's where it's kind of frustrating to see games like yesterday, because it's like we're in year 9 of PJ Fleck and we're seeing performances like against Iowa. Like it shouldn't be happening like that. If you're going to lose to Iowa, you're going to lose to Iowa. The fact that he's only beaten Iowa one time in almost a decade in itself is not great. But to go out in year 9 down to Kinnick and put together that kind of performance, and look, I understand you have a young quarterback, you have some injuries to key players. I get all of that, but if you're trying to build a program, if you want to be taken seriously as a program, stuff like yesterday can't happen. It just can't happen. It's just not acceptable. I don't know, man. It's just, that's really all I have to say about this. Like, it's just really disappointing. It's really disappointing, and it just makes me kind of wonder where this is headed and if there's going to be any sort of growth whatsoever in this program. It was just a really, really huge letdown yesterday. I don't know.
Well, I think the big question becomes, and you alluded to this, can the program, and I won't even say the head football coach, because I've been on the record numerous times that it's more than just the head football coach when you're talking about even becoming where Vanderbilt is at and Indiana. Well, those programs have buy-in from administrations and outside the coaching walls that I'm not sure exists at the University of Minnesota, and if it ever can exist. So then that brings you to a separate conversation of what are we doing here? And can you just accept maybe the ceiling being 7-5, 8-4? But let's assume you can get some of those things. There's a bit more money to play around with. Maybe boosters kick in more money. The question becomes, can the head football coach take the team? Is he capable of getting them back to that high water mark and maybe even slightly beyond as they were in 2019? My gut still says yes, but just about every time, and we know this is the history of Gopher football. That's why last week was great, but my guard was always up heading into the Iowa game. This is just what happens here. It almost always happens here. A really nice win is always followed up with a crushing loss. Oftentimes that crushing loss is worse. You would lose to like a 3-6 Rutgers team. At least you lost to a team that, oh, by the way, I said, and now I'm talking out of two sides of my mouth here, Manny. I was confident Iowa was going to win comfortably, but I also wasn't sure how good Iowa was because all their Big Ten wins going into yesterday were against teams that didn't have any Big Ten wins. So a couple of firsts yesterday. Gronowski throws his first Big Ten touchdown pass, so he's able to do that. And Iowa beats a Big Ten team that has won conference games. When you're looking at the overall scope of the season, Manny, I think you and I were very similar. I think my official prediction was 7-5, but I thought it could easily be 6-6. That's now probably about where they'll wind up. I did think heading into this game that 8-4, the expectations had maybe changed a little bit. Thor and I talked about that earlier this weekend, Gophers 101. But if my expectations can change after a nice win over Nebraska, well, then I think they're allowed to change 3-4 days later after you just get utterly outclassed and embarrassed. So I'm now sitting back here going, well, take this for what it is, but can you go 7-5 and avoid your fourth trip to Detroit in the last 9 years? Because that's probably what you're hoping to obtain at this point. And you better, I don't care what it looks like, Manny, you better beat Wisconsin in about a month's time. You can't lose like you did to Iowa yesterday and let that, I almost swore, let that not good football team right now from Madison come to your hometown and beat you. A program that's as down as it's ever been with a fan base that's turning on everybody. You need to beat Wisconsin this year. You absolutely have to. That is not negotiable. You need to beat the Badgers in about a month's time.
No question about it. I said it to you a week ago after Wisconsin got shut out, ironically, by Iowa, or a couple of weeks ago now, that team is bad. They are really bad. They got shut out 2 weeks in a row, and they're in complete disarray. And so if basically, the Gophers have 5 wins right now, and you beat Wisconsin, you get to 6 wins. 6 wins for me, even with the status of this team, I kind of want more like 7. 7 just feels a little bit better than 6, even though it's just one more win. But you got to get that 6th win. And it's got to be against Wisconsin at least. And then you beat Michigan State, another team that's not very good. Great. And then you get to 7 wins and you just, you kind of live with that. But I don't know, man. It's just weird how it's kind of like, you brought up following up a great win with, a disappointing loss. When you go back to the great pop-up year in 2019, it was kind of the same thing. They had the big win against Penn State, right? And everybody was feeling great, and this team's legit, and college football playoff, maybe Big Ten championship possibility. And then they followed it with the next week, ironically, at Kinnick Stadium against Iowa. Now, that game was competitive. They only lost by 4 points. I think, was it 20? Why do I remember this? 23-19 or 23-17 or something like that. But again, it was just a great win was followed up by a disappointing loss. And so you want to see that change a little bit more. I just think big picture wise, I think what we've seen from PJ Fleck is largely fine. I think you and I both agree on that. But you just want to see, maybe another step taken, or at least get to a point where games like yesterday are not happening anymore. And so I don't know, man. Wisconsin definitely is like a game that you just can't. I don't care. Even at this point, I don't care if you win. I don't care if you win 6-3. Just don't lose. Just don't lose the game. Just don't lose that game. It's not acceptable if you do.
Spent some time, plenty of time, I think, talking about just the defense. The biggest reason for losing yesterday, I mean, obviously the pick six, huge. Get that. The punt return, huge. Special teams just always seems to be an issue at this university. I talked about this is such a dumb thing to even spend time on, but Tom Weston was having a great year, and now the last 2 weeks he can't punt. That's enough punting time for the day. But the other thing to talk about too, Manny, is the offensive line just continues to be a train wreck. They were good last week against Nebraska, but now I'm struggling to even tell you what that win against Nebraska means. Probably just a really good day for the Gophers and a really bad day for Nebraska. Those things happen over the course of a season. The offensive line is incapable of pass protecting against decent defenses. They can't open up any holes. That can't all be on the running back. The right side of the offensive line is a mess. And oh, by the way, the team had -9 rushing yards on the day until the final drive of the game, where here's where I'll nitpick. You're getting I'll just say you're getting your ass kicked and you're trying to run out the clock. I get it. You're trying to get home. Okay, well, you know what? Maybe put in some other players. And if Shiganjansky throws a pick six and you lose 48-3, who really cares?
Yeah,
I mean,
what difference does it make?
It's embarrassing with 6 minutes left in the game or 5 minutes in the game to be trying to run out the clock. And here's my other, as we've now, stolen score north bit, bringing nitpicks into Gophers 101. Again, I'm more, if you're on like this meter, however you do this meter on the coach, I'm like here, right? I'm like a 60-70%. I'm not going to run him out of town even after yesterday. He's been one of the best things to happen to this university in our lifetimes. That doesn't mean there's not really frustrating things.
The overall run has been good.
Yes.
It's been a good solid run.
One of those nitpicks being Manny, and this is where the guy just opens himself up to getting mocked and ridiculed, and I don't think he cares what the Iowa Hawkeye fans think of him, nor should he. It's not his job to. But when you call a timeout with 3 seconds left in the third quarter to play the wind, just to make a field goal, to get on the scoreboard, and I could be wrong here, but I was in the stadium. It wasn't even a cross-directional wind, Manny. It was either basically at his back or coming at his face. It was what? A 38-yard field goal? A 40-yard field goal? Are you worried about him coming up short? And you can also make the argument you should just be going for it. At the end of the day, I don't think fans are going to feel any better because you put 3 damn points on the board. And to call a timeout to do it, to play the wind, it is just ridiculous. And I don't know how much more you can add to that.
You're down 34-0 at that point. Like, what are you doing? What is the point of kicking a field goal at that point? It's the third quarter. You just the more, even if you still have Lindsey in the game, he's your starting quarterback, and maybe you give Shiganjansky some reps, but if you're going to keep Lindsey in the game, just have him run another play. It's not going to hurt him. You know what I mean? I mean, I think, to your point, kicking a field goal down 34-0 at the end of the third quarter is just not. What are you doing?
And calling a timeout to do so. Not that the timeout would have mattered, but we're gonna play the win because it's that important. Well, maybe that speaks volumes of the kicker, and that maybe you just don't really trust him all that much. But with a couple of guys that I'm with, I jokingly said this yesterday, but it's also true. Manny, what went right and who performed well yesterday? I think the only person that you can say, without a doubt, you did your job today, was part of the situation I was just making fun of. Brady Denneberg came in and made his field goal. He did his job yesterday. Who else did their job for the Minnesota Golden Gophers? Maybe the bus driver from the hotel to Kinnick. It's just it is tough because we are sitting here 25 minutes in, and you and I talked that this podcast could go one of two ways. You can rant and rave for an hour, or you just kind of lay out the facts for 30 minutes because there's not a lot to say. And that alone is saying something. And you said it 5-10 minutes ago, Manny. The fact that we are at this point where I'm predicting, mind you, Manny, I'm driving almost 5 hours to go to the game. And I'm
Yeah.
telling people I think they can lose by 3-4 scores. And I settled on 38-10. What does that say about where we're currently at? I can tell you looking forward, Manny, and you and I have talked about this our entire lives when it comes to sports, and people know this. Nobody's going to get excited if you turn around and beat Michigan State. They're just not. You beat Michigan State 38-3, or you beat them 16-13. Nobody's going to be excited. But what you absolutely cannot allow to have happen, and by the way, Michigan State's plucky. They're not great, but they're not as bad as I think a 3-5 record would show. They can do some things. They pushed Michigan last night. You better not let one poor performance turn into 2 in a row. I'm not saying you can't even lose the game. You shouldn't lose. But if you lose in any form, or if you lose and it looks like any form of what we saw on Saturday at Kinnick, then you and I are having a whole different conversation a week from now.
Well, yeah, because you lose if you lose to Michigan State, you're 5-4, and then you're going to Eugene the next week, or I guess 2 weeks after, because I think there's a bye week in between there. But yeah, I mean, you lose to Michigan State, you fall to 5-4. Now you got to go to play Oregon, and then like we said earlier, I mean, Northwestern is not. That's not the check off a win there against Northwestern that we maybe thought it was at the start of the season. Northwestern's pretty solid football team, and you're not playing them at home. You're playing them on the road. Granted, you're playing them kind of in an unorthodox atmosphere at a baseball stadium, but you're still playing a team that's, like Michigan State, plucky, but a little bit better. And so now it's like, if you lose to Michigan State, are you potentially fighting for your bowl eligible lives against Wisconsin? You're 5-6 and then trying to desperately beat Wisconsin just so that you're bowl eligible. I mean, Wisconsin's a bad team, but that's not an ideal circumstance, because now there's a ton of pressure on you against a team that's not very good that you should beat. And the potential there is that you might kind of succumb to the pressure and tighten up a little bit, and all of a sudden you screw around and you lose to Wisconsin, you're 5-7, and things have really come off the rails for this season. So they gotta, I think it's really important, I think, next week against Michigan State to get right. Again, I don't care how you win the game, just win the game against a team that you should beat. You have them at home, because if you don't, things could get a little dicey in the weeks following that.
Well, and especially with college kids, you worry about the checkout factor. If this thing starts to go south, again, rivalries are great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying a lot of the players on that team that are from this area don't care about it, but not everybody on that team cares about beating Wisconsin like Minnesota fans do. They're not all from here. They're going to be told about the rivalry. They're going to be trained up. They're going to be trained to dislike Wisconsin. But that doesn't mean they care about beating Wisconsin, perhaps to the level that Manny and Ross do, and those who are listening to this pod and watching this pod. So you do worry about that if it starts to go south. So I do think it's very important somehow, some way. And that, again, if I want to give the coach credit this morning, which is very hard to do, he has done a fairly good job getting this team to respond from awful losses. And he will have another opportunity to do that next Saturday, and we'll see what they can do. Because, yes, I do think it's important. It's not the sexiest opponent. It's not the biggest of big-time games, but it is important to somehow try and flush that game, get a victory, and you worry about Iowa again when you play Iowa next year. At this point, the Iowa game is done and gone. It's not going to do anything for you. Had you won it, it could have been a springboard to bigger and better things this year. But at this point now, Manny, it's kind of back to what we talked about. Just your ho-hum season, win your 6-7 games, maybe win a bowl game with whatever players decide to play in it, and use that as a springboard for next season. I will say this for whatever it's worth. I think your number of getting to 7 wins, maybe it was my number, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
7 wins to me is fairly important just for what it looks like record-wise. It affords you to lose a bowl game that, let's be honest, Manny, unless you're in the college football playoff now, depending on the bowl game that the Gophers go to, it matters from a standpoint if it's in a cool location and fans want to go, by all means go. Take a vacation, have fun, watch your favorite college football program. But the game itself doesn't really matter. I'd say a handful of bowl games matter, and anything in the college football playoff matters. But 7-6 at the end of the year looks a lot better than 6-7. So getting to 7-5, maybe even winning that bowl game again and getting to 8 wins, to me, at least optically looks good. I struggle with what that means in recruiting. People always say, oh, it looks good to have played in a bowl game. It doesn't really. Look what Indiana did last year. They'd been to 1 bowl game in 75 prior years. So that's hyperbole, everybody. I know it's not that bad. So we'll see where it goes from there, or excuse me, where we go from here. And I think we just have to sit, wait, see how the team responds, and go from there. I really don't think there's much else to say other than yesterday at Kinnick was disappointing, upsetting. I don't love using the word embarrassing. I think I already did. It's not necessarily embarrassing for me. I don't play for the team, but perhaps it's embarrassing for the players. It probably should be. And it's annoying. It is annoying. Yeah. And the more I sit and talk to you and everybody watching and listening, Manny, I guess what annoys me more is that I kind of went into it thinking they would lose by 3 or 4 touchdowns. And then they did, so again, What does that say about the program at this point? I guess that's going to be what I think about this week, Manny, as I prepare to talk with Thor midweek. Nothing's really going to change with how I feel about PJ Fleck leading the program. For the most part, unless this thing goes sideways, Manny, and they finish 6-6 and go 3-9 next year, okay, well, then that's a different conversation. But I'll continue to say what he's done here over a decade is basically unmatched. You can go back and look at it. At this point, it is better than what Glenn Mason did at the University of Minnesota. And Glenn Mason, for the longest time, for better or worse, that was the bar of success at Minnesota post Murray Warmath. Well, PJ Fleck has been better than that in almost every statistical way. And I'm not I'm not jabbing at Glenn Mason. Glenn Mason, especially now, fantastically hilarious guy. And by all means, a lot of people love him, and that's fine. This is not a rip at Glenn Mason. What it is an acknowledgement of what PJ Fleck has done. But also, for everything that we have laid out here, Manny, there are still warts and stains on the resume. And again, I know when he showed up, he was told just beat Wisconsin and you'll be fine. Largely, that is true. And he's been pretty good against Wisconsin. And he's been very good against Nebraska. Logically, at some point, he'll lose to Nebraska again. Could be the next time they play them. He should get credit for all that. But again, to be 1-9, and you did win the game against Iowa, I will never take that game away from them. I don't care what the Hawkeye fans say. I don't care what some Gopher detractors say. At the end of the day, you won that football game. You get credit for winning that one game, Manny. But that's what it is. It's 1 game in 9 attempts under the current college football coach. And it does have to be better. Does it have to be 6-3? No. But I'm being dead serious when I say this. Can it be 3-6? Can you beat them 1 every 2-3 times that you play them? I don't think that is that much to ask, because I don't think the talent disparity, despite what the scoreboard has said the last 2 years, and now I am talking out of both sides of my mouth again, Manny, because I was poking fun at Nebraska fans for saying this. I don't think the talent gap is that wide. But you know what? The score is what the score says it was, and you've been completely outclassed home and away in the last 2 years. So this week, Manny, I'm going to spend some time thinking about the state of the Gopher football program and if I'm happy with where it's at. I would say I'm not happy with where it's at, but I also have an understanding and acknowledgement
of where it's at.
It's still pretty good, and it could be a lot worse, but
Yeah.
also I still feel like it can be a lot better. It's just a weird spot to be in as we record this pod on Sunday, December 26th. Wow. Hey, it's the day after Christmas, Manny. October 26th. I think that's where I'm at. I think that's almost my closing words. It's an evaluation week, I think, for me, for a lot of fans, and definitely for the team.
Yeah, I'm with you on it. And again, I can stomach losing to Iowa. It's just, the overall record against Iowa for PJ Fleck is not good and shouldn't be accepted. And I think yesterday's performance should not be accepted at all. It doesn't mean that, PJ Fleck needs to be fired, or that the university just needs to move on, and that it's never going to get better. But I think there's enough of a sample size now to show that, and there's enough examples around college football to show that it can be better. And I think it's okay for Gopher fans to want more and want better. You still have to remain realistic about it. You know what I mean? Because, I brought up Kurt Signetti and Clark Lee as examples of it is possible to take sort of dormant programs and make them competitive at a high level again. So it's certainly possible, but, and here I am about to talk out of both sides of my neck. I do think it does need to be understood that what Kurt Signetti and Clark Lee are doing at those programs is not normal. It's not normal and should not be something that we, like, I think too, with where Minnesota is at right now, I think to expect them to be in the Big Ten championship game next year, playing against Ohio State or Michigan or whoever, or Oregon or somebody, I think is not realistic. But I think it's fair to hold out hope that it's possible to get to the level of where Indiana is, because Indiana is doing it. And it's not impossible, even in this climate of college football, where it seems like all the teams that have all the money and all the resources, the Alabamas and the Ohio States those teams are always going to be there at that level. But it is possible for the Indianas to compete like the way they have in the Big Ten now the last couple of seasons. And what they have going on down there with Clark Lee is in a conference that's equally as difficult as the Big Ten, if not more. It's possible to remain, competitive and have a chance to where your fan base is riled up and excited. And we saw a little bit of that in 2019. So we know it's possible. We know it's possible. It's not something we should expect every year, but we know it's possible. We know that they can get there to that level. But again, 2019 was 6 years ago. It's been a little while. So now it's kind of like, all right, PJ, you've been here for almost a decade now. Let's see if we can have another pop-up season like we did in 2019 sometime over the next couple of years. And who knows, you still have a very young quarterback. If you manage to keep him around over the next couple of years, who knows? In a couple of years, you make some NIL moves. Can't believe I'm talking about college football in that way, where you make some moves in NIL.
You make a trade here and there, man.
Yeah, you make a transfer here and there, bring in a key prospect in a transfer. I think it's possible to get to that level. We just have to see it, and games like yesterday just can't be on the menu for getting back to that level.
It's not an apples to apples comparison, but for every Clark Lee and every Kirk Signetti, there's a Foster at UCLA and there's a Billy Napier at Florida, right? Guys, you just have to find the perfect coach for your program. And I've said this for years. I think there is a coach out there for every program that can win. Now, again, I think it's up to the individual fan, the fan bases, the administration, the athletic director to decide what does winning look like if it's not a national championship. Because I think for a lot of universities, a national championship is probably unrealistic. Is it entirely out of the question at the University of Minnesota? no, because Indiana is proving that it's not at Indiana, and they've never been a football school in their life prior to the last 24 months. So is it possible? Yes, but you need a lot to go your way.
And,
to
and
make
to your point, it goes beyond just the head football coach. It's got to be a buy-in from everybody in the administration.
Correct. And I don't want to make excuses for the head football coach. He deserves no excuse making after yesterday, but there's a reason why he's had 4 coordinators in 4 years. And here's a hint: 4 defensive coordinators in 4 years. Here's a hint: it's not him. He's not the reason that that's happening. It goes above him. And people are aware of that. Can they make those changes for that not to happen? And by the way, in closing, it might be 5 defensive coordinators in 5 years after this season. Heck, it might only be 3 in 3 years. I don't even know. That's how the revolving door has been with defensive coordinators over the last half a decade at the University of Minnesota. That is Manny Hill. I'm Ross Brendel, coming to you from Witness Protection somewhere in Iowa City. Manny and I will talk next week, hopefully reviewing the Gophers getting to bowl eligibility, but they're going to have to earn it. We'll talk about that next Sunday, and Thor and I will reconvene and regroup and talk with all of you this Thursday. This has been Gophers 101. Hopefully Manny and I's effort was a bit more satisfactory than what we watched on the football field yesterday.